Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters podcast, and I have the blessing, the joy to be your host. The Muddy Waters podcast exists ultimately because the mainstream media is failing at its duty of informing the people of the things that are going on in the state and the impact of in particular policies that are going on. Instead, they act as a propaganda arm of the left, and as a result, fortunately, we do have the Maine Wire, which once again would not exist if the mainstream media just did its job. So fortunately, we do have things like the Maine Wire, and we have this podcast that exists to help people of Maine better understand what is actually going on in our state. We do that by interviewing people from around the state, whether they be legislators or individuals who just have a story to tell that the mainstream media doesn't want told, but that needs to be heard. And so that's the case today. We are fortunate to have with us Marianne Hunsinger, who is a mom of a daughter who had to deal with competing against biological males. And so thank you for joining us, Marianne.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, I think it's like it's one of those things where like this is a story that just needs to be told but I hate that it needs to be told. I hate there's so many things that are going on in our society that's like, oh, that would be a really good person to interview, but it's terrible that we need to be in this situation and having this conversation. And so I'd rather, as much as I enjoy our conversation with you, I'd rather not being in a position where we need to tell this story. But here we are. We live in the 20s, as I like to say. I would have preferred the roaring 20s. You know, yeah. I know they ended with the Great Depression, but it was a lot of fun up until that. Whereas the 2020s, whew, yeah, it's not been the blessing that I think we would have all wanted. But it was a blessing to meet you when we put on an event earlier this summer, Justice in Jazz, to kind of raise more awareness and keep talking about this issue. It was really great to meet you and kind of hear some of your stories. So I wanted to have you come on to kind of tell us like who you are, where you come from, and like why you're engaging in political conversation, we'll say, in the 20s, a time in which it is very challenging and polarizing. Our whole political landscape is polarizing, and if you speak out one way, you're a bigot. You know, so what's brought you to this place? Who are you? Where do you come from? And why are you here?
Well, first, again, thanks for having me and giving me a chance to talk about it. I am an Air Force veteran. I retired after 25 years in the Air Force as a medic. And my children, I have three. One is almost 30, and I have a 17 and 16-year-old. The 17-year-old is my daughter, Olivia, and she is a pole vaulter for the town of Herman. And what got me into this whole thing in February of 2025, she was pole vaulting in the indoor state pole vault track competition, and she ended up pole vaulting against a biological male, and she would have finished fifth place. But this male finished naturally first and pushed her down, the line. And we had no idea up until that point that there was even a male in the league. We had no idea. You know, up here in Herman, you know, it just isn't something you see and you hear about it. Certainly, we've heard about it on the television in other states, but not here. So we were just completely floored when we saw that. And we spoke out after that. And it's basically from that moment to now, I've been going to school board meetings and trying to raise awareness that this is actually happening to us. You know, this isn't something that you see on the TV. This is really happening. And I really want to say that aside from the obvious that, you know, biological males should not be competing against or sharing spaces with biological females. I think that's just common sense to me. I thought it was, but I was really shocked to learn that it's not common sense for a lot of people. And one thing that really hurt us was being called, you know, a bigot, being accused of being hateful and not having compassion, and none of those things are true. None of those things are true. So having Olivia go through that was hard because she was, especially come spring, when spring track hit. Sorry, the cat. He wants to make his presence known. Sorry, but when spring track came around, we were hopeful that he wouldn't be competing. We thought, I checked the rosters. We looked at the first few meets to see if he was competing, and we didn't see him. So we thought, oh, okay, maybe he does tennis in the spring. Maybe he doesn't do track in the spring. So Olivia was relieved. She's like, okay, good, I actually have a chance now. Well, fast forward, and right before the state meet, the regional meet, the Western Maine Conference for where he is, that's when he competed. So the last qualifying meet of the season, he competed to qualify for that meet. And then he won it by vaulting 11 feet. 11 feet this kid vaulted. And the closest female at that time was at 9.5 feet. So he was on the roster to compete this spring for the state meet, but he never showed up. And thank God, because if he had, Olivia would have been knocked right off the podium if he had shown up. So, now from my town, what I find frustrating is they would not set up policies to prohibit biological males from competing with and sharing spaces with biological females. And when I would press the issue offline, what I would get is, well, we don't want a lawsuit. We don't want a lawsuit. They were more concerned about saving themselves than they were the girls. And I just could not wrap my head around it. Now, so I would go to meetings and I would speak out and say, look, we got to do something, because it's not going to be long before someone comes to Herman and a biological male who wants to compete against the females, and we just can't do that. So what they did do, though, which is a step in the right direction, they drafted a letter to and this just happened in the beginning of July meeting. And they drafted a letter, the school committee, that said words to the effect of, to the Maine School Board Association. So they said, look, we here at Herman, we don't support biological males, participating in girls' sports and spaces, that kind of thing. That's the gist of it. And they were sending it to, which it passed the committee, so they're sending it to the Maine School Board Association to pressure lawmakers into passing legislation. And while I do agree that that's a step in the right direction, I appreciate that. They at least publicly said they don't support it, but they're falling short of creating policy for Herman, saying that you can't come here to do that. They won't do it. And no matter how hard and it's not just me, there are plenty of parents that are with me on this. Like, look, we gotta protect our girls. And one of my biggest complaints is you cannot lift up one group and marginalize another one. That's not right. So when you lift up the rights of trans kids, you're squashing the right of girls. And that's not right, and if you're going to have compassion, one of the school board members actually said, talked about that state meet that in the spring when the kid didn't show. He actually talked about it. He said, do you guys know, and he was speaking to the board, he said, that this kid was so bullied that he didn't dare, or she didn't dare compete. And we need to have compassion for this kid. Like, he talked more about having compassion for that kid than his constituent, my own daughter. That we need to be more compassionate for this kid. And and that's when I had to get up and say something, because I wasn't going to that meeting. I was going to let it go, but I had to say something because, I'm not saying don't have compassion. I mean, that poor kid must be so confused to be male and think you're a female. That must be hard. That's something I can't imagine. And, that must be hard. So it's not that I don't have compassion for them, but you have to have compassion for all of them. What about the girls that won't become state champions because of this male? Can we be compassionate for them too? So I was really floored by that he would say something like that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it stems from the Marx. I mean, the Marxism that has made its way into our society and into people's brains, where they tend to look at whoever they see as being the most marginalized person, and then we need to get we can disenfranchise anybody else. So it's if you are more marginalized, then you can take away the rights of people that are considered to be less marginalized. Anyway, it's ridiculous ideology. Obviously Marxism is bad. If you hadn't known, if you're watching this podcast and you didn't realize that Marxism was bad, number one, I'd be surprised, but it obviously is. And and again, like, it's this idea of, like, let's take away the fact that this person is going through some stuff, and let's ignore the fact that they actually don't even identify as being a female. They identify as being non-binary. Let's ignore that fact for just a moment. It's still, you have to look at the potential risks to women, and this is the part that I don't understand how people don't see, unless they're just like reflexively reacting against anything Trump says or anything the conservatives do, or they're afraid of being called a bigot, whatever it is. You can't ignore the fact of the reality of life that if we allow this type of stuff, there are going to be bad players that are going to take advantage of it. There are, we know this, right? Like, this is the reality. And people are going to use it and abuse it. Is this kid? I don't know. Is this kid going through some stuff, and should we have compassion for him? Yeah, but that doesn't mean that his compassion trumps our need to protect both the spaces, most importantly, in my opinion, although people seem most upset about the sports, but I think the spaces, as well as the sports of these young girls who compete. And again, like, the reason that Title IX exists is that women were not competing in sports because they can't physically stand up on average. Yes, you may find one woman over here that can compete. There are anomalies where a woman can compete against a man, but women have never held the world record in anything over a man, and they're not going to. I was talking to somebody about this just for fun, and it was like, if you look at women today, and the fastest woman today, she's faster than the fastest man like 50 years ago, right? However, the fastest woman today is you can fact check me on this because this is not an exact statistic, but the idea is that the percentage of speed, we'll call it that. So the gap isn't the same amount of seconds, but the gap is similar. So women essentially run at about 90% of the speed of men. That is consistent. Like, the men versus women, 50 years ago, and men versus women today. Obviously, we've gotten better at training and doing all that kind of stuff, and people are using steroids, men and women, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing that, like, women get faster, but they're not getting as fast as the men who are doing the same things. There is a biological difference. It's not fair. It doesn't create an opportunity for women, which is why Title IX exists.
That's right. And I would add that we have a state champion long jumper at Herman, and she won by almost a foot, I think, to her second place finisher. Now, when I took and I compared it to the males long jumpers, if she had competed with them, she would have been, I think, 15th. She would have finished 15th, and she was the state champion, and she had a very impressive jump. I mean, a very.
Well, you just said she was a full foot longer than any other girl.
That's right.
Right. And so that's an anomaly in and of itself, right?
But she, when you look at where she jumped and you look at the males, she finished 15th. And then in the triple jump where she finished second, she would have finished like 18th with the men, competing against them. So, and this girl is a remarkable athlete. And
obviously, yeah.
Couldn't even make it to top 10 with the male. Right. So, obviously there's a difference. And I don't, it's just mind-boggling that we're, and as far as the spaces go, it's one of the criticisms I hear all the time is, they think, the left, those on the left, when they talk, they say that we are assuming that all trans people are violent rapists. And at no time has that ever come. I have never heard, and I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I have never heard a conservative person say that. I've never heard that. The criticism that I hear from the conservatives is the discomfort of having a biological male undress in front of you when you are prepubescent or pubescent is embarrassing, and it's very uncomfortable. And God forbid this female has had some kind of a trauma, some kind of a sexual assault sort of trauma, and then having a male come into the room. It isn't that that person is overtly trying to assault people. It's just their presence alone that can make it very uncomfortable and traumatic for these females. And we need to take that into consideration. You cannot allow these girls to be traumatized just to appease, someone that is transgender. That's not fair. Not when you can provide them a unisex bathroom, a single stall bathroom. I think that's the solution.
Or use the bathroom according to your biological sex. I don't like what's really interesting to me in this conversation, right? In general, and people who have watched me before are like, "Yep, he's going to say it again." But no, but it's like this idea of biological sex, like this idea of gender. Like when I was a kid, we didn't have gender, right? I'm not that old, right? But we didn't have gender. Gender wasn't a thing. You filled out forms. You said sex.
Right.
Like, what is your biological sex? I don't care what drugs you take. I don't care how many hormones you take. I don't care. You are a male or you are a female, right? Like that is the reality. And that, even like we had Alan Bean on the podcast a while back, and like even in situations of this, the intersex situation, which is extremely rare, even in those situations, you're still either a male or a female. Like there's a genetic way to prove that. There are no people that you can't figure that out with, right? So either you're a male or you're a female. Gender was created. What's interesting, right? Gender itself was created by the left, in my opinion. Like they created this term, and then they're blaming us for gender norms. I'm just so confused. And now we have to recognize different genders, and I never knew. You're a boy, you're a male, or you're a female. And that's the biological reality. And so anyway, that. I think there's so much about this, and that is just like it's really hard to understand. And I sometimes encourage people to be careful not to go too far down trying to understand this, in a sense, because like it's always been a mental illness. I think it's even still diagnosed. If it's changed, then there's corruption in the medical system. But this is a mental illness. This is not like something that is normative and is healthy, and nor is it something that we should encourage. It is a mental illness, and trying to understand a mental illness and trying to like wrap your head around, can be damaging to your own mental health, I think. But anyway,
well, I'll tell you, part of my job in the military as a medic, I dealt a lot with mental health. And I received a lot of training, and I met a lot of therapists, and I worked with a lot of therapists in the civilian sector because they treated a lot of our people. And one of my jobs was to coordinate care for people that came back that needed some services, whether it's physical or mental or both. So I interacted a lot with therapists. And yes, there are good therapists and there are bad ones, and my kind of thought process on it's just my Marianne's opinion. I don't, but if you're a therapist and the first thing that you do when someone sits down to tell you, geez, I'm not sure if I'm a guy or a girl, and you're trying to convince them that they're abnormal, that's a red flag to me as a therapist, right? Yeah. I mean, so if I am female, And if I were to sit down with a therapist and go, I think I'm male now. I think I want to be a guy. And they agree with me and they tell me that everything about me is wrong. That's so counterintuitive as a therapist. You're supposed to make people accept who they are, right? And come to terms with who they are. That's part of therapy. I am a female. And if I'm feeling male, I want to go to a therapist to help me figure that out and accept who I am. I'm a woman and I'm a very proud woman. But a therapist is working with you to help you believe that you're wrong, that everything about you is wrong. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I mean, so here's what's interesting though. Like, there's a lot of counter arguments from the left, right? From people who believe in this ideology, and I have good friends who believe that some people are transgender, and I respectfully disagree. I don't think that this is a thing that's healthy, but their arguments would be that the therapist is not trying to convince them that there's something wrong with them and that I guess that they are in the wrong gender. They are trying to convince them that, but is not trying to convince them to be anything other than what they are. They actually believe, right? They believe that these people are in the wrong body, right? That they actually are. And so this is what's dangerous, is when you get into belief. It gets really dangerous. Now, though, I will tell you that I have some inside information. This won't surprise anyone, right? Like, the doctors that are performing these surgeries don't care. They just make money on it, right? Like, there are local hospitals that will do these types of things, and that some of the doctors won't do it. Some of them will. Apparently, it's contentious between the ones that will and the ones that won't. And but the ones that will, it's like they're not ideologically on board, but it's profitable for them, right? And so that's something that we need to. What's interesting about this is, like, we talked about, like, I think, your political history. In other words, like, you weren't really involved in politics. This is kind of what's pulled you in, right? And like, this though shouldn't be a political issue, and I think one of the things that we should root in our minds, like, number one, don't trust politicians, right? We shouldn't trust politicians. I don't care if they have an R next to their name, a D next to their name, right? Like, let's just be honest about that. Don't trust the government. Don't trust politicians. Don't trust people who have political podcasts. No, I'm just kidding. But obviously take everything that anybody says with a grain of salt. But if people are saying insane things, like, we have to remember that the same people who are, like, championing this are the people who are championing the like, we should have open borders, and are just ignoring the fact, and are trying to defend people who have, like, raped and murdered people here, who came here illegally and then did those things, and they're trying to defend these people, right? These people are the same people who are saying, who are on the other side on this issue. I just don't understand how you can reconcile any of that in your brain. But yeah. Anyway, so tell us, like, about, like, I think you kind of tell us about. Well, my brain shut off. It happens every now and then. Well, I was gonna say, I think tell us about, like, what impact this has had on your daughter's desire to play sports.
So she, the thing about Olivia is how well she adapts to things, and how she, she's a shy person. She isn't one to put herself out there per se, but she's not afraid to say what she's thinking. So she'll tell me, she's not gonna not compete. She is a competitor, and she's going to compete. And if they're going to allow biological males to compete against her, then so be it. She's going to compete. She's not going to take a knee. She's not going to, she doesn't have anything against people that want to do that. She's, do what you want to do, but she's going to make them beat her. If the biological males feel like they want to compete against girls, She's like, fine, I'm going to make them have to beat me. They're going to have to look me in the eye and beat me. And that's kind of how that's impacted her. It gives her drive. It does give her drive, to be better. But at the end of the day, she, when she found out that this kid was competing, her face fell. Like she was just, like, oh, we'd just gotten really used to the idea of her having a fair shot. And while yes, she's going to put on, she's going to straighten her front out, she's going to go do it. But at the end of the day, she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to do it, and she shouldn't have to do it. And I try to get her to come on podcasts and talk about it, but she's it's just not her type. And then I got thinking about that, and she shouldn't have to. We were kind of talking about that.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to have a conversation about this at all. But I don't want my minor child to be fighting with adults for this. That's my job as her mom. And all of us parents and adults, it's our job to fight for our children so that they don't have to do this. I want her to live her best life. And she enjoys pole vaulting. Win, lose, or draw, she loves the art of the competition. Yes, she wants to win, but she loves to compete more than she loves to win. Winning is a wonderful consequence, of competing and training, but competing is what she really enjoys. So while it has impacted her, because she, just doesn't want to compete against a male, but she won't stop. It's not going to stop her, and I just have a lot of respect for her for that. And I personally do not want her to have to go on all these shows and go on. She went on the radio. She addressed the school board. She came with me to that event. But I don't. She shouldn't have to. That's for us to do. It's our job to fight for her.
Yeah, no, and I've said this a number of times. I don't know if I said it that night of the event, but I've said it when I've. Because I happened to be there when a girl named Julia Dietrich, who spoke, I think before, she spoke before you, right? Yeah, or did she? Yeah. So she's a student. She's not an athlete, but she has competed with some things with debate and stuff like that. Yeah, she's just been really great. And one of the things that I've just noticed, and I think to your point, I say is like, we shouldn't be in a position where these girls and these students are needing to stand up and speak up. Unfortunately, as I like to put it, the adults in the room can't be adults, right? And so, unfortunately, and this isn't no pressure on your daughter. Obviously, I think you're right to be the spokesperson, to be the one speaking up. But unfortunately, not enough. There's a combination of things. Not enough adults are speaking up because they're afraid of losing their business. They're afraid of, the consequences, that the social pressure. They're afraid of being called a bigot. All these things. So that even though like this is an 80-20 issue, everybody's like, really, most people are on our side, right? Now, some people are upset about like how Representative Laura Libby like posted it or whatever, but everybody, like 80% of people are like, yeah, biological males should not be competing in women's sports here in the state of Maine. I think like the data showed like 67%, but I think there were like 13% that were like, we don't know. That seems like a little bit more people that are afraid to, even on a survey, fill out what they actually really believe, because they probably live in Southern Maine and they're afraid, right? And so like, unfortunately, not enough adults are speaking up. And then when adults are speaking up, people aren't listening. Unfortunately, like people on the left, they turn a blind eye. They just ignore it. There's this, I don't know, willful blindness, I think is what it's called. And like, generally speaking, I get it. I worked at a business. I was quiet, not really quiet, but like I worked for a company and I wasn't like trying to come to work to talk about politics, but if it came up, I wouldn't shy away from it, and I think a lot of people are afraid with this issue. I was very cautious, not biological males in women's sports, because that didn't happen in the industry that I was in, but just with the issue of transgenderism and its impact. And in my place, we weren't being forced, but they were starting to push in that direction of like, you need to start telling everybody your pronouns. And like, I remember doing one training that said that, you know, if you meet somebody and you don't get a chance to exchange pronouns, it's appropriate to send them an email and say, hey, it was really nice meeting you. I didn't get to know what your pronouns are. Here's what mine are. And I'm like, there is no way in any world that I would ever do that. Like, are you crazy? Like, I don't even know what's going on, right? But like pushing that stuff, and coworkers who, you know, people who came into the company that were, you know, they, them, or all were biologically females who believed that they were males, you know, and I kind of adopted this policy that, like, look, I'm not going to try to find a way to offend people, but I'm also not going to say something that is in opposition to what I believe to be true. And so I would use people's names, and then I just would use no pronouns, right? You know, but ultimately I would have only been able to skate by for so long doing that, because the reality is, I am, even in that situation, we'll just talk about this, right? I'm being put in a situation where I am having to adjust and adapt what I believe to be the normal way to communicate and behave around people in order to accommodate somebody else who might get offended by the truth that I speak. And that's like, you know, this is one of the things that our freedoms are limited by how much they impact other people's freedoms. Like, we live in a free country. However, there are certain things we can't do. I'm free to do a lot of things. I'm not free to take your stuff, right? That's called stealing, right? And so there's a lot of freedoms that we have, and some of them begin to violate other people's freedoms. So like the company being in a position where I have to change my language around certain people is a violation of my freedom of speech. It's called chilled speech by the U.S. It was when Title IX was struck down, the 2024 revisions of Title IX. Chilled speech was why they were struck down. One of the reasons, chilled speech, and then which is stopping somebody from saying what they actually believe, and then compelled speech, which is forcing people to say things that they don't believe, such as use pronouns maybe that they don't agree with, or call somebody, you know, names. I don't care. You can come up with a name, but like when it comes to like the other things, I have struggles there. But you know, eventually it was probably going to get to a point where, oh, you're just using a name. You're trying not to use a pronoun. You have to use the pronoun, right? And this happened to a teacher in the East Coast a while back. I think it was maybe Virginia or something like that. And he got fired, not because he used the wrong pronouns, but because he didn't use pronouns. He ended up having a lawsuit, and he won the lawsuit. But the reality is that's the direction that these people are going. They want to force people you know, to agree with them in order to be able to come to the table. And it's just like, we need to be able to have a conversation about this. And we need a conversation that is based in reality. You know, and we need one that, you know, protects the vulnerable people, like, you know, women and children.
But you know what, too, these kids, these minor children that are being, you know, whether it's brainwashed or whatever, being told that they're something they're not, and then they're getting, you know, like take this kid for example. Somebody made the decision to not allow him to compete until the very end of the spring season. That was an adult that did that. The adult did that. That kid didn't do that. The adults that were in charge of safeguarding this child decided that, oh, we're going to hide you. And then we're going to bring you out at the last second. What did they think was going to happen? You know, did they really think that, you know, so what this one gentleman on my Herman School Committee, when he was so compassionate for this kid, was talking about bullying, it was actually protesting. It wasn't bullying, it was protesting. People protested. They were outraged that this kid was hidden for the entire season until the last second. It was unsportsmanlike, number one. If you are a competitor and you're an athlete, you don't hide. You get out there and you compete. If you are truly proud of being whatever you are, then get out there and compete. If you really don't think there's anything wrong with what you're doing, then get out there and do it. You know, but they didn't. They hid him. And what they did was they put a ginormous stake around this kid's neck and fed him to the lions. That's what they did. This kid that they're supposed to protect. So have compassion for this kid. I have a great deal of compassion for that kid, because what those adults did to him is nothing short, in my opinion, of abuse. That
Well,
is
it's not.
abusing that kid. And it's
Yeah.
unconscionable that you would put a kid in that position. So naturally people protest. And then of course there are ignorant people out there that say ignorant things, which doesn't help
Yeah.
anything. And
Sure.
so this poor kid, I have no doubt, felt attacked because he was, essentially. And what they should have been going after are the adults that did that to him, because
Right.
the adults put him in that position. And so I could go on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
It bothers me that adults did it, and they're setting these kids up to have mutilations, to take medications for the rest of their lives. I mean, this isn't something that goes away. You just take a pill and you're cured. No, this is something you have to take forever. And we are not. People may not understand this, which shocks me, but we're not cookie cutters. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I am allergic to some medications. You may not be allergic to the same one. Why? Because we're not the same. We're not the same. So these medications that you're willing to give to these children forever are not going to have the same effect on everybody. So they're like, oh, their hormones are going to be down to normal. Like, what are you talking about? No, they're not. The only way you'll ever know that is if you have to test them every single time. Every single time. And they are willing to do this to those children to prove they're females, and it's unconscionable to me. It's abuse. It's nothing short of physical abuse for these poor kids, and then into their adulthood. And that's where the fight really needs to be. It doesn't. You got to start somewhere. So you have to kind of start with stopping biological males from competing against and sharing spaces with biological females. That's where you have to start. But that's not where we're going to finish. We have to go after the adults that are putting these kids through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me just one moment. We're going to do, I'm starting this thing where I'm trying to put ads on the podcast. So we're going to break away for a little ad from one of our sponsors. He's a handsome guy. What does your website say about your business? If you've tried hiring a freelancer or doing it yourself, chances are it didn't turn out the way that you'd hoped. Outdated, hard to use, unprofessional, and let's be real, a bad website isn't just frustrating, it's costing you customers. I'm Chuck Ellis, co-founder of Moralist. I started this business because I saw how often small business owners like you were struggling with websites that didn't work. That's why we created our website rental service. At Moralist, we don't just build websites. We create platforms that build trust, help your business grow. For one affordable monthly cost, you'll get a custom design, secure hosting, and round-the-clock support, all fully managed for you. No surprises, no huge upfront cost, just a website that works. So if you're ready to take your business to the next level, click the link, sign up today, and let's build a website that you'll be proud of. All right. Yeah. So the link, if people there's no link in this, but there is the QR code. So if you're interested, check it out. Or go to portal.moralist.us and check out what we have to offer. So anyway, so you're right. It's interesting. I think that when we're talking about like this issue of transgenderism, there are some people that want to be like just stay away from that part of the conversation entirely and just talk about girls' sports and spaces because there's more agreement there. The reality is, the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority of Mainers are realizing, hopefully more and more, I think, that transgenderism itself is frightening, especially the more that we learn about it and the more that the studies keep coming out and showing that this stuff is unhealthy. Like for me, like, yes, I care about girl sports and spaces, but I actually am more concerned with this social contagion that we have that's called the transgender the death cult. You could call it transgender death cult, which is I mean, like, there's so much about this that is just absolutely insane. There's a great podcast, if you haven't listened to it, on Joe Rogan. Graham Linehan from Ireland. You may know him. One of my favorite TV shows is called It's a sitcom called the IT Crowd, and he's one of the writers. He was a comedy writer that got blacklisted for standing up to protect women, essentially. And he basically, everybody in the industry shut him down and called him a bigot because he was standing up against this. But there's so much data. Like, this is the reality. Like, a couple of things. When you look at the treatments that they're giving to these kids, like aside from the psychological stuff, right? And I just want to highlight some of that in a bit too. But like, when you look at the stuff that's being given to these kids, some people, like my opponent when I ran for House in 2024, would tell you that, oh, this stuff has been well tested, that all the medical journals say that this is healthy, that these hormones are good, and that all these procedures are good and healthy, blah, 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 and that they're not experimental, which they absolutely are experimental. Because what they're saying, like, adults for years have been taking these, therefore they're not experimental, is what they're trying to say. But there's a huge difference that, first of all, between a child who has not gone through puberty, whose body is still developing, and an adult who's gone through puberty and their body is no longer developing. That's a very significant difference. And as the more and more data comes out, we're realizing how awful these hormone blockers, I mean, hormone blockers just in general, just immediately sounded like a terrible idea. Like, let's tell your body not to do something that it naturally does, and let's see how it works.
This is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the line from Jurassic Park, where I think they make the comment like they were too busy asking the question if they could. They didn't ask whether or not they should. Something along those lines. I think I butchered it a little bit, but I got the point across, right? And I think that's what's happening here, is that people are just like, they're not really thinking about like the reality of whether or not this is actually good and helpful. And they're not asking questions. They're not doing studies to verify the long-term impacts of this stuff. I mean, just think about long-term impacts and them telling you anything. Remember COVID, when they were like, there was this vaccine. We know that there are no long-term impacts. They developed the vaccine 6 months ago. What are you talking about? You know that there are no long-term impact? Come on. So this is the same people, right? That are also saying that there are no negative long-term impact. When we know that they're saying that it's not, it's all totally reversible, when we know that some of the drugs that are being used for this stuff were used to chemically castrate people. And so there's just the horrors of the gender cult are it's so frightening, I think, to believe that a society would get to the place where they're trying to make this normative. And that's like the genetic, that's like the drug side of it. But even like you said, when you look at kids, and the idea that they're twisting kids and trying to make kids, so kids are already struggling to figure out who I am. They don't trust, like, it's natural and human to be like, is there something wrong with me? That's every human being asks that, especially when, let's see, they hit puberty.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. And so the question I ask is, like, what teenager hits puberty, what person I should say hits puberty and thinks, oh, this is normal, I really love this?
Yeah, right. No, you find me the one that does it. I would love to meet them. The unicorn, because that's not real.
So some of the stuff that we're telling these kids are like, they're indoctrinating. I think that's or brainwashing, indoctrinating, same thing, right? Kids into believing that if you feel uncomfortable in your own gender, then you may be the opposite gender. And then we also are like, oh, there are actually 72,000 different genders. It's like, I don't think this is the only reason for the terribly low test scores in Maine, but I don't think it's helping. When you teach people, this thing that is obviously true and like verifiable and like just, and you tell them that it's not, there's all these other things that are like from Fantasyland. And you wonder why they struggle having a grasp in reality and understanding all these other concepts that are based in reality. Like, you shouldn't be surprised.
No, I agree with that. And you brought up, our test scores. and that's such a good example of how the transgender phenomenon has matriculated into that. And the DEI, it's kind of like its second cousin, and it kind of matriculates into it, and it starts to take over your curriculum, and you're more focused on spending more time on getting the political correctness out of the way. The class is over by the time you've gotten all that done. So naturally, like you said, the natural consequence of this nonsense is poor test grades, and the numbers don't lie. The numbers don't lie, and so something's got to give here, and that's again part of another sort of get out the vote kind of thing.
Yeah.
In your towns, and that's kind of I did speak to the Alliance Defending Freedom. They have some wonderful resources there that you can learn about different laws and how they apply and everything else. And God, I think I have what you have. It just went right out of my head.
Yeah.
Just went right out of my head.
Well, but your point is, I think ultimately we need the laws to change here in the state of Maine. I mean, I think the reason that we're here is because of the addition of gender identity to the Maine Human Rights Act, and now the claim as a result of that means that if you don't 100% in every way affirm a child and allow, like, so, and this is like kind of the psychosis of the people who buy into this, right? For the most part, it's like if you don't agree with them 100%, even though the data proves that this is not true, right? But like if you don't agree with them 100% in the gender that they think they are, then they're at risk of suicide, right? And so, which is a lie, but they believe that. The data says that it's wrong, it's false, it's untrue. The data actually suggests that you're at a higher probability of committing suicide after you've transitioned, quote unquote. And the highest percentage of this is actually primarily in men who transition. Women who transition, I don't think it's as damaging for them in the process. They might not be able to have children, but the transitioning back is possible. But men who go full boil, you can't come back from that. So it is a bit more challenging, but like, again, they operate under the assumption that if you don't affirm in every way, then you're putting them at risk of suicide. And so when you're in that mindset, like then you're going to force that, right? You're going to say that everybody has to. And that's where, the Maine Human Rights Act comes in. That's where the bill that requires doctors, essentially, it's a anti-conversion therapy policy that was enacted by the legislature that requires doctors to affirm. They can't question. So when a child says I am, there are no questions. They can't ask, they can't deny, they can't even ensure that the child knows what the heck it is that they're doing, because that could be considered conversion therapy, and then they could lose their license, right? That's the world in which we live.
Yeah, I know, and that's that is scary. It's scary to think about it. I know in MSAD 11, that's the Gardner area. I actually grew up in Gardner. They were trying to get a clinic in the school. So
they succeeded.
Yeah, I think though, did they though? Because I thought that next round it got repealed or something, or they couldn't do it because of some.
There's some zoning issues that I think they're probably running into that hopefully will hold them up, at the very least hold them up. But they did initially pass and agree to do it. I know that much. Yeah. Yeah,
yes. That is true. Yes. So that to me was terrifying, because they're wanting to treat children and prescribe medication to minor children without parents' consent. And it's mind-boggling, and which is why, again, voting. You've got to vote. If your representative doesn't vote the way that you think they need to, you got to reach out to your representative, and you've got to get out and vote. I looked at, and just in my town, we have like 6,800, I think, registered voters here, and at the last election, I think only like 1,200 came out to vote, and this was a local election. This was like the school board and the town council. So like only 800 and some, I think there were hundreds of votes that were blank. They didn't even check the box, so I think it's incumbent upon all of us in our town to start there. And that's kind of what ADF was talking about, the Alliance Defending Freedom. Start local. That's what Alan Sarvinas, with the parental rights in education in Maine director, was saying. Start at your grassroots, at your town, and start getting people out to vote. And so that's where I sort of started my political journey, if you will, is to just start with voter registrations and bring that data out. Like, just look at the numbers. It's appalling to think that we have this many people registered to vote, but only a handful of them, a tiny fraction of them, actually come out to vote. And when I talk to my neighbors, I'm like, did you vote in this last election? And like, when was that? They don't have a clue. And,
Right.
I was guilty of that. I was guilty of that too. So, I get it because, you're a parent, you're busy and whatever, but, it wasn't until Olivia, went through what she went through that really was like a taser. And it's like, we got to wake up, and we have to, talk to our neighbors, talk to your friends, have a conversation. And you can have a conversation without being belligerent. You can agree to disagree, but we have to relearn that, I think. I don't think people know how to disagree anymore. And
Civil discourse. Disagree with someone and still consider them to be a human being who is a loving person, or whatever you want to call it, worthy of dignity and respect.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't get there unless you just sit down and talk. And division is what they want. I think the left kind of wants us divided.
The globalists, it's the globalists that want us divided. It's not just the left. I mean, they do have their reign, their grip, even within elements of the right. Like, the right is not perfect, right? But right now, it's the only option, right? Like, it's the only option. Like, the tentacles completely own the left. They don't completely own the right. There's some hope there, and we need to push out the left and get rid of the Democrat rule. And hopefully, even though I don't think I'll ever be a Democrat, I would love to see the Democrat Party reform or some other party emerge that is a common sense party that might disagree with me on some things, but is not insane.
Right.
So, yeah.
If we could just be sane, that would be wonderful. Sanity is a wonderful thing to have.
It is great.
I would like to be sane, but
yeah,
I feel crazy. I feel, honestly, when I was going through this with Olivia and I'm listening to the other side's arguments, I really thought I was crazy, because I'm like, how is that even? How do you think that way? I can't. I had a hard time trying to connect with. I always like to talk to people that don't think like me, because I can learn from them. And I think it's important to learn how other people think, because how else can you bridge that gap? You have to be willing to reach out and go, tell me how you got there. But when I do that, they could not answer me. They could not give me an answer. For example, Facebook is fabulous. I do have a Facebook account, but I'm not a big poster per se. I'm a troller. I just go and I read everyone else's stuff. But every once in a while, someone will throw some, especially when this whole incident occurred and everyone's on Facebook, talking about boys and girls sports and spaces. And so somebody will make a comment about how all these studies, you kind of alluded to it earlier, about, all these hormones and these studies and how everything's going to normalize and be perfect and kumbaya. So I kind of ask the question, very, very neutral, and just say, wow, you're referencing these studies. I would love to read them. Can you point me to where they are so I can read these studies? Crickets, every time, crickets. When I ask them to give me their evidence that they supposedly have, crickets. It's always crickets. I still am waiting to find out what this magic study is that shows people that are transitioning are completely hormonally normal. I'm still waiting. I still haven't seen it. And and that boggles my brain, because if you're gonna, it boggles my brain. Like, how can you stand there and cite a study? Now, I'm a medic, I'm a lab tech. I understand studies. I understand how the in and outs of these things work. I am no expert, but I have the 60,000 foot level sort of overview on how a study works. And it's a lot more than, well, my cousin's goober over there took labs, and so therefore there it is, evidence. That's not how it works. There's a big to-do when someone publishes a study. And it should not be hard, if you're referencing a study, to produce it. So when you can't produce it, you kind of lose your credibility. And I was astounded by how many people just believe it because someone wrote it. Just
But yeah, I mean, it's almost like in our society we have a lot of like people who have gotten, I think, so brainwashed. I mean, that's the reality, right? And so they get all their information from one side of the aisle. They don't realize that, as I said at the beginning of this episode, and I say at the beginning of every episode, that the mainstream media is a propaganda arm of the left, and I include Fox in that. I think Fox, you can get some good news on Fox. There are some good people there. But I think Fox is controlled opposition. I've thought that for years before I even got involved in politics, right? I thought, because I looked at Fox and they said things that were in the direction of conservatism, but in an outlandish way.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Fox is making fun of conservatives, and conservatives don't even know it, right? Yeah. So all of the mainstream media, right, is a propaganda arm of the left. No, you're good. So anyway, but these are the places that they're getting these are the places that they're getting their information, right? And they've been told by, whether it's social media that they follow, mostly like mainstream media, they've been told that they've just gotten to this place where they believe that this is where you have to get information. I remember I was having a conversation with an engineer, and this is where I'm like, people, so I don't judge you for doing the best you can with what you have, and you come to a different conclusion to me. Maybe you don't have the capacity to be able to understand certain things, right? And so you have to trust other people, but there is this thing called wisdom, and you should figure out who's trustworthy before you trust them. But regardless, most people should have the capacity to do some research, right? So I was having a conversation during this is in 2020, and Fauci was obviously lying, and we knew it was obvious that he was lying. And that's become more and more obvious over time. But also, the WHO, it was on the hook for having lied, right? And so I'm having this conversation with a woman who is an engineer, who was buying everything that they were selling, hook, line, and sinker, right? Yes. And I mean, she recognized that Fauci had lied. And then, so she was trusting the WHO, is what she was saying. I was like, but the WHO lied first. You understand? They didn't release information to us. They intentionally hid information from us. Yes. And she's like, well, then who do we trust? And I'm like, yourself. Use your brain. Do some research, people. The internet is there. Now with AI, we can't trust everything we read on the internet, but we can find information. We can ask difficult questions. We can do research, and then we can find other people out there that are exposing things. So fortunately, alternate media shouldn't exist, because the mainstream media should do their job, but they're choosing not to. And so they're losing out to alternate media. So, podcasters, not like me, well, you can watch this podcast and enjoy it. And I bring on people who will share stories, and some of them who have expertise. When it comes to economics, I'm pretty good there, but I'm not the expert in all things. And I wouldn't even call myself an expert in economics. I just know the broad strokes of how it works, working in banking for a lot of years. And I was a business major, actually a business economics major before I shifted to be a math major. So this is kind of my thing. But outside of that, I'm more of a novice, and that's why I try to bring people in. But there are some great experts out there. Jordan Peterson, when you talk about this issue, is fantastic, right?
Yeah,
I really like Russell Brand. for just general national politics. This guy is hilarious. If you want to listen and hear what's going on and laugh at the same time, Russell Brand is your guy. And they're exposing some of the things that are happening that you wouldn't otherwise hear about. Same thing with obviously Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, who never used to be in any way political until the left went after him because he took ivermectin. And since you can get a lot of really great information there. So unfortunately, this is where we need to go to get information because the mainstream media is lying to us. And so, but so many people are afraid to do that because they've been conditioned, right?
Yeah.
They've been conditioned to believe that, oh, I can't listen to those conspiracy theorists, forgetting that the term conspiracy theory was created by the CIA to discredit people that they didn't want people to trust.
Yes.
Just for fun, that term, that's where it came from, right? And so, but they're so afraid of being called a crazy conspiracy theorist. And like, there's so much social conditioning that goes on that keeps people afraid, that keeps people in the dark. And so they don't. So I have compassion, but people need to do their own research more. We need to do some digging. We need to work with people in our community to better understand what's actually happening in our world. That's why this podcast exists. But yeah, no, it's crazy how many people have bought into stuff that is just so obviously, not true,
It's scary. Again, my eyes have been opened during all of this. And COVID is where it started to open.
Sure.
That's where I really actually, when Trump got elected the first time, that's when my eyes started to really open. I really started paying attention then, and the whole Russia collusion hoax.
Oh yeah.
The whole and just being, it was one thing. I'll never forget it. It was one thing to say, "Oh, don't trust politicians." That was like a punchline to every joke, but it was real, and my eyes really opened for me when Trump got elected the first time. I just was appalled. I was still in the military then. I retired in 2017. And I just remember, and that's when I, started to kind of pay attention more than I did.
Yeah.
And then after I retired and, hanging out with the kids and taking care of them, things were pretty good. And then this with Olivia, and then when COVID hit, boy, my eyes opened again. And, you think, oh, I'm open, I'm good. No, then COVID hits. And then you're like, holy crap, these people, what they're doing and the lies. And, and I believed Fauci at first, it made sense. Yeah. It was logical. And then, oh my God, the betrayal of it. I think it was more betrayal than it was really anything else. Just like, how could you do, and then how deep that went. And now, here we are again with this, all this DEI and the and what
CRT,
and
critical race theory. Yeah.
But COVID, when the whole curtain came down with the education system, and then I'm learning about my own school district. I'm like, whoa, what is happening? We weren't nearly as bad as others, thank God, but, still. And then now here we are with, boys competing against girls, and that's an actual thing. And, it's time, but I do have hope. At the end of the day, in spite of it all, I still have hope that people are waking up. They're kind of that, to quote the Matrix, I'm taking the red pill. They're taking the red pill. They're waking up out of the Matrix. And, and I think that it's up to people like me and you and just average citizens to wake up and talk to each other and really, and don't be afraid to talk to each other, and don't be afraid to vote the way you feel like you need to vote. Don't be afraid to do your research. And like you pointed out, do your research because, the information is out there, and we can bring sanity back. That's the thing. It's not gone. Yeah. It's not lost. We're not, this isn't Armageddon. We're good. We can do this, the same way the left did it. They did it. We can do it. We can bring it back, and, we can come back to the middle, and we can, bring sanity back, I think. And I just would love for people to just, if they learn nothing else from me or here, nothing else from me. Just know that we can bring sanity back, and it's okay. Everything's going to be okay. Take a deep breath. We're good. We got this. Just do your research, follow the truth, and go vote. Vote these people out, and then we can get sanity back.
Yeah. So what office are you running for next?
I'm running for get my kids through high school.
All right. Well, once we get them through high school, then maybe we'll revisit the conversation and see what we can get you to run for. No, I mean, that's all really. I mean, you're absolutely right. We need people to get informed. We need people to pay attention. We need people to show up to vote. We need people to participate in the political process. I mean, the American government the government that we have set up is an experiment in self-governance, and it only works if we are all paying attention. We're all using our brains. We're not just going with the flow. We're not too afraid to speak up. We're not too afraid to have civil discourse. These are things that we need to happen. What other people do in response to our civil discourse is not on us, right? We need to be willing to be open and honest about who we are and what we believe. And the reality is, like, one of the things that was on with Richard Youngquire yesterday in a special edition, which I spelled wrong just for fun. If you're looking, I spelled it addition, and I was like, oh my gosh, how did I do that? Anyway, but a special edition that's on X, check it out. But we talked about I think what it's going to take. I think the reality is, here in the state of Maine, simply get out the vote efforts is not going to be enough, right? Because we need to convince people of the I think the dangers of the left, but also the hope of the right. Like we're not. We haven't historically I'm the chair of the Cumberland County Republicans. We haven't done a great job as Republicans at kind of projecting what we're for. We're so busy like reacting to the insanity of the left that we get defined by what we're against. A lot of times, the party of no, as a friend of mine said, well, no to cutting off the healthy parts of children. Yes, no. If you want to call us the party of no on that, I'll take it, right? But we also need to project what we're for. And I think one of the things that we've not been as good at doing that. We're for healthy societies, and healthy society starts at healthy family units, right? We need to we care about the family, and we also believe in freedom, right? That's a huge part of what the Republicans, the party, believes in. And like, it's a matter of, do you want to be enslaved to the state to get all the benefits that they're offering you, but you have to jump when they say jump, you say how high, right? Or do you want to be a free individual, right? Because the government will take care of you, if you call it that. But with the Republican Party, what we offer is self-determination, right? We are looking to empower people to live their lives. That's what we're all about. So those are a couple of things I could say more, but either way, like we need people to get involved. We need people to get out to vote. If you're out there and you're an independent and you're thinking, feel free, register as Republican, don't register as Republican, but engage in some way. We need people to engage in the political process. We need candidates. Like, I'm down where I am. I'm looking for candidates for city council, school board, all that kind of stuff, to try and push back against the insanity of, I've called out my city councilor, Jennifer Monroe. Check her out if you will. Check out the Muddy Waters podcast. If you look down, you'll find this crazy lady who's suggesting that we're deporting legal citizens to foreign countries. That's what she's suggesting. She's trying to get the police department to interfere with ICE because they're deporting citizens to foreign countries. That's the claim that she makes. Anyway, we need different people. We need, in order to do that, we have to have conversations, because we're not going to help people see the truth unless we're willing to at least have those conversations. So we need people to engage. And so obviously you're watching this podcast, you care about the political process and what's going on in our state, but we need you to do more, essentially, or just to figure out what you can do. This is what we were talking about yesterday when Richard was on, is like, not everybody needs to run for office. Not everybody needs to go to a school board meeting. Not everybody needs to speak up at a school board meeting, but find a way to contribute and be willing to take a risk. We all have to do more than we want to do. it may surprise people, but I don't want to do this podcast. I don't like being in the limelight. I don't like the fact that now there are over 100 hours of me on a podcast that are available, and people can go back and critique and like criticize me. I don't like that. I don't know, but I do this because I feel like it's helpful to our movement. It's helpful to people being able to understand what's going on. We all need to take risks. We need to make sacrifices if we're going to have hope. But I do believe, as Marianne said, I do believe that there is hope. And the tide is turning, but we still need to keep at it. We need to work hard and do what we can.
Yes. So we have to learn how to have conversations again, and just leave it at that. Just talk to people. Open your mouth, use your words. Words and deeds. I say this to my children all the time. You kind of touched on it a little bit. Your words and your deeds define who you are. So when someone, says something to you that upsets you, that's not a reflection of you. However, your response to that person is a reflection of you. So how you respond to people reflects upon you. How they respond to you reflects upon them. So words and deeds, they define who you are. So be mindful of them. But have a conversation. It's okay to disagree. And someone's got to start. So I encourage and challenge all of you to start. Just open your mouth and use your words. And you'll be surprised how well that will go. And it will go well. People are not, by and large, people are not monsters. They don't breathe fire. They're actually nice people. There are a lot of really nice people that just want to get by the same as you. So talk to them.
I would 100% agree. I think that I've had a number of conversations recently with people that I disagree with on a number of issues, right? Yeah. And we kept having conversations. We're still friends. And oh my gosh, we disagree. Okay, we disagreed on transgenderism. We disagreed on abortion. Yeah. And and we don't think the other person is the devil. I don't know. It's possible, Yeah. And I remember I was hanging out with a group of friends who I'm still friends with. We haven't hung out much in a while, but in 2020, 2021, we were hanging out for a fire, and we're really politically charged, right, in our society, and especially at that point. And Mike Pence's name comes up, this is before, actually this was 2020. It was not 2021, because this is before Mike Pence made Trump angry. So this is back when he was still loved by most of the people on the right. So Mike Pence's name came up, and like the people that I was with, the tone of how they behaved when his name came up reminded me of cats hissing, right? Like there was just this incredible disdain for Mike Pence, and I'm like, how can you be upset with Mike Pence? I don't what has he done? I mean, now is a different story especially for conservatives, the other side of the aisle. Although I think liberals might love him now, interestingly enough. Yes. But this group of people at the same time, and they disagreed with me on a lot of stuff politically. I took a 45-minute earful after I mentioned that I was going to be voting for Trump in 2020. But they still, after that, I heard that they even though they didn't agree with me, they all respect me because I have really well thought out positions, even though we don't agree, and that I'm not a jerk in the way in which I present them, right? And so and that's where very much disagree on a lot of issues, on a lot of these issues, and yet we're able to come to a place where we're still friends. And I think that's possible in our society. We do need to talk through things. We need to, but we can do it. It can be done in ways that are not polarizing. And so I think we need to do that. Now there are some people out there that you shouldn't talk to somebody if they disagree with you, right? I think that's on both sides of the aisle, more on the left than the right, but I think we need to get back to civil discourse, and I think if we can do that, we can make some serious progress in our society. Because the truth will win out if we talk. If we keep our mouth shut,
that's right.
But if we talk, we have logic, we have reason, we have the truth on our side. So, so cool. Well, thank you so much. Oh, if you got something else to say, I can let you say. Yeah, well, I was just going to say thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation, and just appreciate, I love that you're standing up for your daughter, and you're willing to speak out about what you believe to be true, and where so many people are afraid of like the B word, being called a bigot.
Oh, yeah.
It's we need to stand up against that insanity. If we stand up and speak out and say that no, it's not, I think I was watching a Jordan Peterson thing, and they were basically saying that you say something, you want to be careful, you can't use certain language that because it might be offensive to transgender people. And Jordan Peterson in the email, in the interview, was basically like, well, but you run the risk that what you're saying right now is offensive to me.
Yeah, right.
And like the interviewer is like, I'm trying to think of a response. I don't, because like that's the reality, right? And so like, but we need to have those conversations and say, look, it is anti-Christian to suggest, because that's what I would say. I'm a Christian, and I don't expect everybody to be a Christian, but the reality is, like, telling me that I need to violate my conscience is a violation of my faith.
Yes.
How is that
right.
Inclusive? That's very exclusive to people who have a grasp on objective reality. So anyway, it's this their system breaks down, and if we talk about it and we communicate about it, it will make problems for them that they'll have to try to figure out how to work through, and it will lead some people to truth. So let's do it. So thank you again, Marianne, and
thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's been great. So, all right, we'll see you guys all here next week. I think we've got an interesting story about a lawyer and some interesting things that happened in his life next week. And also, I think he might be the founder, or whatever you want to call it, of the Common Sense for Maine PAC. So you see us